for Dr. J.
I think he got in trouble with his sanitation bosses.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so today we're talking about the wasteland.
Oh, we're on. Okay.
Yeah, we're rolling.
Cool.
Yeah. Is it?
That we're rolling or talking about the wasteland?
All right, in 3, 2, 1. Today, we're talking about the wasteland. Had to make myself pretty. Even though the shirt and tie isn't pretty enough, I have to make sure this is pretty.
Well coiffed.
Well coiffed. Trying to remember what Mark said. He said, "You just go over there and fix your flippy." So today is the wasteland. Written in 1922 by Mr. T.S. Eliot.
Published in 22. Yep.
Published in 22.
Written in 21.
Real quick, if you like what you're seeing, click the like button, hit subscribe so you get updates. You can also check us out at thebetafiles.substack.com, where you can catch not only this, but also written content, original written content by our massive staff of writers. We have a huge staff of writers that are working. No one. To give you premium content. So check us out. Also, you can find us here on YouTube and on your favorite podcast carrier. So whatever podcast you listen to, or whatever podcast, what do you call the app? Podcast app you use, you can find us there at the Optic Poet. All right, or the Beta Files podcast, and then you'll find the Optic Poet. So there you go.
Is this the only video you make now?
It's the only one. Yeah, I don't actually do a Beta Files podcast anymore, because what I've done is can't believe I'm doing this on the podcast, but the Beta Files is now the brand.
Are you still going to do Richard?
The things are he's part of the brand.
But you're going to do the videos?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Because the Richard Cranium videos are my favorite. Because he's
a great guy.
He's a great guy.
Have you been reading his material?
A little bit, yeah. He's funny.
Yes.
It's still, St. Mary's Sex Drive is my favorite.
Yes. That one, well, yeah.
And it's not because my church is called St. Mary's.
No.
Or that you.
No relation.
Or that your original last name for one of the staff.
That was an accident.
Happens to match one of the last names of our staff.
That was an accident. That was an accident. No, the one about his dad is really good too. Richard, go somewhere and die.
I love that one. That one's great.
Your generation is going to get us nowhere. Go somewhere and die.
So if we're talking about the wasteland, you
Yes.
can't just launch into the wasteland. You have to. I would say you would have to lay a lot of groundwork, and I can do some of that. You can do some of that.
Yeah, we talked about that.
I can join in with whatever you do when it comes to high modernism.
Yeah.
In poetry in particular.
Yeah.
None of this is possible. None of this is possible without the First World War.
It's
There
true.
was modernism before the First World War, and some of it was actually pretty edgy. 1913.
Yeah.
You get Stravinsky's ballet, The Rite of Spring,
Right.
which affected the audience so much that they were pulling each other's hair and punching each other. A fight broke out during the ballet.
ballet right there. That's some good shit. If you smell what Stravinsky's cooking.
But
Because Stravinsky, I'm sorry. Now you got me on this. Let me do the last one, because Stone Cold Stravinsky said so.
and so we have modernism before.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm going to talk about that when
we have it in music, and modernism goes way back.
Well, okay, so you gotta distinguish. There's two.
There are two.
There's European and there's American.
Yes.
This is where we split.
Yes. But even European modernism doesn't really hit its stride until during the First World War and after.
Yeah.
But what is it about that war? This is not a rhetorical question, and I'm not just asking it to answer it myself, but what is it about that war that changes the world? And there are a couple of things worth noting.
I have one answer.
Well, I know, and I'm going to get to yours in a second. But for a moment, I want to hear myself talk. So
Go for it.
the first thing is that we had never seen a war fought on such a global front. I mean, we had European wars that sucked in a lot of Europe, but this one was different. And the second reason it was different, and a student mentioned it this morning, and I've heard and said this before, he beat me to it. It's a common student,
Yeah.
one of our British students.
Yes.
That it was 19th century tactics and 20th century technology.
Yes.
And
that's where I was coming.
And the consequence of that, the result of that, is a massive loss of life that we had never seen before.
They lost a generation.
Well, if you were to, and even now, I don't know, I mean, I'm sure they've recovered, but for a long time, there were whole villages
Yeah.
that were completely wiped out. There were no young men left because they all went together. And the war was so horrible in terms of just loss of human life that these men never came home. They were completely wiped out. The technology being used, the machine gun was used on a fairly regular basis. Tanks were introduced. And then probably the most horrifying, the bombs, and the most horrifying aspect of all of it is the use of chlorine and mustard gas.
Yeah.
And so if you're a poet or a writer or a composer or an artist living through that war, when you finally come out on the other side, you can't pretend like the war didn't happen. You've got to deal with it head on. And they did. And that's the crucible. That's the crucible. So modernism exists before, but because, and so American modernism is different, but all of these modernisms are a direct result in the form they took after 1918, are a direct result of that war. You can't think about high modernism without thinking about that war.
Yeah.
You can't think about anything that happens in the 20th century without talking about that war. And if you leave it out, and so I mean, those are the big reasons. Had it been a traditional war with weapons from the 19th century, we may not be talking about it as much as we are now. But that's not what happened.
No.
And
no, it's what I was going to say was what you said. And it's the first time that they line them up.
Yes.
Like traditional war, but this time instead of muskets, they've got machine guns.
Machine guns.
They're just mowing each other down.
Machine guns and gas.
And hence the trenches.
And barbed wire. And there were a few bright moments. The Christmas truce.
Yeah. When
these soldiers came out of the trenches and exchanged gifts and talked to each other and played soccer together.
Yeah.
I mean, that's powerful.
Yeah.
The literature that was being written during the war is also powerful. Probably the two most popular poems that come out of that war are Macrae's in Flanders Fields and Wilfred Owen's in Dulce et Decorum Est. Dulce et Decorum Est is a very vivid depiction of a gas attack and of one of the soldiers not being able to get his mask on in time. And he's described as being like a stroke victim. That's not the word that Wilfred Owen uses, but it says his face was sagging from the nerves being attacked by the gas.
By the agent, yeah.
Oh, it's horrible. So imagine you're a writer. Imagine you're a writer and you're getting the news from the front. And then the American writers who served, right?
Yeah.
Ernest Hemingway, Andy E. Cummings were both ambulance drivers.
Yeah.
Robert Graves, I think, fought in the war. They were there. They saw it. And you can't forget that, and you can't pretend like you didn't see it, and you can't possibly create art without looking at it head on.
Well, you look at those early novels.
Yeah.
That's where Hemingway is. You know, in The Sun Also Rises, he's returning from the war.
Farewell to Arms.
Farewell to Arms. It happens during the war.
During the war.
Look at Cummings, My Sweet Old Etc.
Yes.
He's writing a letter home to her.
It affects everything.
I sing of Olaf Gladdenbig.
Yep. It's why we have a Second World War. It's why we have a Korean War. It's why we have a Vietnam War. Everything grows out of that war. And it was fought because everyone had signed a treaty with everyone else and they had no choice.
Yeah.
And there are no horrible, horrible countries in this war. Unlike the Second World War, where you can actually identify an enemy and say, okay, they actually are evil.
Yeah.
But even then, with the Germans,
it's the Argentinians, man.
with the Germans, you can't say they're all awful during the
Right.
Second World War. It's the Nazis and it's the SS. The kid you like to talk about in the machine gun nest at Normandy, he's just a kid.
He's a kid.
He's not a bad guy.
No.
He's doing what he has to do.
Yep.
He's just trying to live. And most of the soldiers on the German side were not bad people. They were just trying to not die.
Yeah.
Just like our guys were trying not to die. So if you're a poet looking at the war and you say, okay, now what? And Eliot answers the question, now what? This. Go.
Okay.
I get a little vociferous. I get ramped up about the war.
Once upon a time, there was a little country called USA.
Not a
USA.
superpower.
Huh?
Not a superpower.
Not yet. And in this country of USA, there was this little patch of land that they both wanted, that these two factions within USA wanted.
Yep.
And the main catalyst for disagreement over this patch of land was whether or not they could have free labor. I'm really simplifying the Civil War here.
It's all right. We don't have much of a choice. You saw I talked about the First World War in like 3 minutes.
Yeah. So what ends up happening is these little two factions in USA pick a fight over that little patch of land.
Yep.
And we get the Civil War. More importantly, we get Reconstruction.
Which was a disaster.
Which was a disaster. Post-Reconstruction, what you have is a wasted South that has been left behind. Because the people who come down to quote-unquote invest in the South are not the people you want coming down to invest in the South.
No.
And it's not until the 30s when the TVA is actually established that we finally get to see progress in the South. What's this got to do with modernism in the First World War? Well, it has nothing to do with the First World War. It has everything to do with modernism, because out of this period we get regional writers. These regional writers are hooking into realism and naturalism. But they're doing something with it that the realists and naturalists are not doing. They're putting the focus on the individual, not the group.
Right.
So there's a shift. It's kind of hearkening back to the Romantics, right? And this is the early modern period in America. There is no equivalent to this in Europe at this time. This is a uniquely American thing.
Yes.
But it's part of the modernist movement because a lot of the traits these artists develop carry over into the high modern. At the same time this is going on, you're at the end of the Victorians and you move into the Edwardian, right? That's happening during the American early modern, okay? Everything connects in a post-World War I world. Around 1819 is where you start to see the literature start to connect to each other.
1919?
Yeah. 1918, 1919.
I thought you meant 1819.
No,
I'm
no,
like,
no.
We've gone
Around
way back.
1918, 1919. No, that's
You're
the
making
Romantics.
a radical argument.
That's
Actually,
the Romantics.
Actually, modernism started in 1819.
Well, actually,
Oh God.
my argument. No, I'm not going to do that. That is, we'll do a podcast on modernism because there's legit there's a legit argument out there that modernism is older than even we think.
Yeah.
But
I've seen one of these arguments before, and I'm pretty convinced it's accurate.
mhm.
So that's why you have to use the word high modernism to distinguish.
To distinguish, well, because if you look at the modernist movement, it's whatever you want to. That early modern period is the one that's under contention. When does it start? Because you get to the post-World War I world, there is a shift. And that high modern period only lasts for a few years. It doesn't last long.
Less than a decade.
And then you get to the late modern, which is, of course, post-depression or post-crash.
Yes.
And you get into the depression. And we go back to what we're seeing in the early modern period. All of those traits that the early modernists lay out, the late modernists pick back up on and run with. Because in both, unlike the high modern, we're going to talk about this in a minute when we get to the wasteland, unlike the high modern where everything is lost and it's kind of a feeling of, and this is the beauty of the end of this poem, this question of what do I do now? The early modern and late modern periods, it's a tale of survival.
Yes.
It's not a tale of devastation, right? It's how do we survive? So the early modern is how do we survive this new exploding industrial modernity that is sweeping everywhere?
And a fascination with it too.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the late modern is just straight up economic survival. How do we get from one day to the next and not die?
Yes.
Not starve,
Yes.
not waste away,
Yes.
that kind of thing. So they're both looking at survival, whereas the high modern is not necessarily looking at survival, but it is looking at devastation and asking the question, what happens now?
Yeah, what next?
We have survived. That's the beauty of the end of the wasteland when he talks about the boat.
Yes.
I'm still here. You're not. You're gone. But I'm still here. And he mentions, I sit on the shoreline, the arid land behind me. Shall I at least set my lands in order? And we'll get to that.
Some of the most beautiful lines in that poem.
It is.
Because in many ways, it's an unlyrical poem with a few lines like that mixed in.
Yeah.
That kind of just arrest you.
So then we get to the wasteland. Then we get to Monsignor
Ezra.
So let me preface this, as I always do with my lit students. I love Ezra Pound.
Yeah, you do.
Before he went to Italy.
It's a man crush.
When he goes to when he goes to Italy, I fall out of love with Ezra Pound
because he loses his mind.
He does.
Like literally lost his mind.
But when you look at Pound in the 1900s, 19-teens, and 1920s, well, the first half of the 20s.
Yeah.
During that period, because I think he doesn't go to Italy until like 28.
It's
something
late.
like
Yeah.
that. It's late.
Yeah.
But that period, he's a genius.
He is.
You could argue he's a mad genius because he does go off his rocker.
He does, and he becomes obsessed with Jews and economics. And that's when he falls apart. That's actually when the cantos start to fall apart.
Yeah.
When he becomes obsessed with Jews.
The reason why I love him so much, I wouldn't call it a man crush. Maybe a fantasy, but not a man crush.
You'd like to meet him.
I would love to have sat down with him from that period.
Me too.
Not the Italian period.
After he gets out of the hospital, he starts to go back to what he was before. That's encouraging.
That is encouraging. But he had done the pre-Italy. I would have loved to have met that man. The man that Hemingway writes about. The way he writes about him, he sounds like he's spacey.
Oh, he was spacey.
He has like very little social consciousness.
No filter whatsoever.
No filter. Oh, I would have loved to have sat down with him. Because let's face it, my filter's really well built. the reason why Pound is so awesome pre-Italy. I'm going to be referencing that throughout the whole podcast because I don't want people to take it the wrong way. And yes, we can look at a man's life and distinguish what was good and what was bad and still disagree with the outcome.
Pre-fascist Pound was great.
He was. He practically, not 100%, but I would say 85% of modernism is due to him.
Yeah. Yep.
The late early modern period, like towards the end of the early modern period, he's got his hands in that because he's dealing with Yeats.
Yep.
He's dealing with Frost.
Yep.
He's dealing with Williams.
Yep.
He's dealing with H.D.
Marianne Moore.
He's dealing with Moore.
Yep.
He's dealing with all these people, and he helps establish poetry, the magazine.
Yep. And he's dealing with Eliot.
He's dealing with Eliot. He's starting to get in touch with Eliot. Now, the story that I've heard. Okay, so Pound, I'm not a fan of Pound's poetry. There are a couple of things like A Pact.
I love the
God.
poetry.
I know you do.
Oh.
The cantos makes my brain hurt. But things like A Pact or Station at the Metro. Return, yes.
Anything in personae.
Yeah, yes. That stuff I can get down with, but I love his prose more. His commentary
Is great.
is phenomenal.
The ABCs of literature.
Yeah.
Ah!
Oh, yeah.
His essays and manifestos on vorticism
Yes.
and imagism
Yep.
are breathtaking.
They are, and that's the early Pound.
Yes.
Because Pound, like Yeats, Pound goes through several manifestations. The last manifestation is one we don't like. But the first two, well, and we take issue with the second one. Because the second one is where Stevens says basically, you gave it back to the
Williams.
Academy.
Yeah,
Williams said it.
Yeah.
I thought it was Stevens.
Williams did. That was Williams's biggest complaint about Eliot
Yeah.
was with the Wasteland. Is he gave it back to the professors.
Well, and Pound was right there doing it.
Yeah.
Because what did Pound say to Williams? You haven't read enough.
To be
It's
fair,
Pound.
the only person who read as much as Pound was Eliot.
Yeah. If I would argue that he still didn't read as much as Pound. Eliot's focused on one avenue. Pound's got his hands all over the place. He's the editor. He's the chief architect of everything. And he's taking what the Cubists are doing. He's taking what the Surrealists are doing. He's taking what the Dadaists are doing.
Yep.
And he's converting it, and he's finding these poets and these fiction writers. And he's showing them how to do it with words. The only one in my mind that has a skosh of the influence that he does is Stein.
Stein had a lot of power.
Yeah. So, but that's only because, well, we'll get into Stein some other day.
Her parties
Yeah.
were famous.
Oh. This is the matron of Picasso we're talking about.
Yes. The matron patron.
Yeah. Anyway, hit the gold mine with that one. So anyway, so the story that I know, correct me if I'm wrong, Eliot and Pound are corresponding. Eliot says, I got an idea. Pound says, write it. Don't stop, don't edit, just write it, send it to me. So he sends him 50-some pages?
It's massive.
It's huge. It's a massive poem.
And the title is ridiculous. The title of the original was, quote, "He do the police in different voices," unquote. He gets it from a Dickens novel.
Yeah. And so what Pound does, he takes this massive manuscript, and I always think of Thomas Wolfe's editor when he brought in Look Homeward Angel.
Which is a massive
in a trunk.
book. Yeah.
Yeah. So we gotta cut this down. A fucking footlocker. So, but Pound gets the package, and there's a book, and you can find it on Amazon. It's The Wasteland with Pound's margin notes in it. And there are full pages where Pound just took a pencil and just one line through it, through the whole page.
Yep.
Says no. In fact, there's one point where he draws a draws an arrow to one of the stanzas and just simply says no. So he cuts this thing way down. Vivian gets a hold of it. Eliot's wife, she cuts some out. Eliot takes it, cuts some out, so they trim it. But Pound did the most damage.
Yeah.
Pound is the one who shapes this thing and really starts to mold it. And then Eliot took and finished it.
He did. He first published it in England.
Yep.
He sent it off to an American publisher, and they said it's not long enough, so Eliot added the endnotes. Which actually make it more confusing. You think endnotes are designed to help you.
Now,
They don't help you.
we're going to talk about the Hemingway story in a minute. Now, the thing is, he had published Proofrock before this.
Yes, he had.
And he had started to gain notoriety.
1917, I think?
Yep.
Yeah.
So, and Proofrock was huge. And so he had started to make a name.
Yep.
So when The Wasteland hit, they knew who he was.
Yep.
And they already knew his style. And he had published other things, like The Hollow Men had come out by then.
Yep.
You want to talk about a war? Did you go over that in your World War I stuff?
I didn't talk about Eliot at all.
You need to definitely talk about that one if it's in that book. It's not in the American book, in this one. It's in the Norton, it's not in the one we're using.
If I have time,
Which really pissed me off.
I'm doing Yates and Eliot on the same day.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's a lot.
Well, it's going to bleed over into next week. You know it is.
Well, I'm doing Ginsberg on Thursday, so they're just going to be overwhelmed.
I'm doing Joyce Conrad and Virginia Woolf on Tuesday.
Ooh.
It's going to be a busy rest of the semester.
Who's afraid of Virginia Woolf? I am.
Yeah. Anyone who's ever read her.
Yeah. I actually got into a debate with someone the other day about Virginia Woolf. She's just not my cup of tea. She's not. I don't like her style.
But she's great.
But you cannot deny how wonderful she was.
Oh, she's a great writer.
And the influence. But when it comes to stream of consciousness, sorry, they're not going to beat Faulkner. Sorry. James Joyce it all day long. You're not going to beat Faulkner. That was some shit.
Of course, to be fair, there's no Faulkner without James Joyce.
It's true. There's no James Joyce or Faulkner without Virginia Woolf.
Gotta have Virginia Woolf. William James is the one who coined the term.
Mm-hmm. So, anyway, for those of you playing along at home, we've dropped so many names on you now. We're just name dropping. This is what English professors do. We name drop because it's fun.
So you know Hemingway. Yeah.
Yeah. What a guy.
Next.
Yeah.
What a fucking unit.
What a unit. Like a fucking champion. Blew his fucking head off. What a guy.
By the way, Randy Feltface, Ernest Hemingway. Just type in
Check
Randy
it out.
Feltface, Ernest Hemingway in YouTube, and you will find one of the greatest things ever.
Yeah. The Life and Times of Ernest Hemingway in what, 3.5 minutes?
3.5 minutes.
Oh, best 3.5 minutes you'll ever invest.
Take note, Maddie.
Take note, Maddie. You gotta watch the whole thing to get that one.
Yeah.
Get that reference. Anyway, the hell was I talking about? Pound. So Pound edits it, shapes it, and everything, and then they release it.
Immediate impact.
Immediate. Because they don't know what to do with it. Nobody knows what to do with this poem. And my argument has been my argument since grad school. This is the poem that kills poetry. And poetry has not been able to recover since.
It's trying.
It's trying. And there are several massive poems that come out after The Wasteland that get there, but this is as far as you can take. You can't take it any further yet, as we've talked about before in another podcast.
If it hasn't happened already, I mean, we wouldn't know.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, but look at the time span between it and Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Because, like we've talked about before, Rime at that moment is probably like as far as you can take it.
It was as far as you could take it.
But what's fun with Howl is that Ginsberg inadvertently does this whole, okay, boys, this is what we can do, let's play.
Yeah, we need to talk about influence
Yeah.
later on in the episode. Because I think you still need to finish your thing about Pound and
Well, and so...
thinking of Morse Towlett.
The,
He's great.
Yes.
He's great.
He's phenomenal. So Hemingway in A Movable Feast has a story about him and Pound and Eliot. And this is during the editing process of The Wasteland. This is when Pound is actually working on The Wasteland and sending it back and forth to Eliot. And Pound, at the time, Eliot is still working at the bank in London.
Right.
And Pound is just dying to get him to Paris because that's where everybody else was. And so he and Hemingway come up with an idea that they're going to start a donation fund. Pound nicknamed him the Captain. So whenever they would talk about Eliot, Pound would say the Captain. So it was a fundraiser to bring the Captain to Paris. And what Pound had like this little house, like a little servant house in the back of his lot. They fixed it up. They were going to put Eliot up there while he finished The Wasteland. Well, they finished it, and he published it. And the line in the book is something like, he published it and got famous. So they have all this money that they don't need.
Yep.
Pound did not gamble. Pound did not drink. So, while Hemingway, drunk like a fish, and loved to go to the dog track and gamble. So Hemingway drags Pound down to like northern Spain to this dog track. Tricks Pound into getting drunk.
Oh my God.
And they blow all the money at the dog track.
All the money they were saving for
all
Eliot.
the money they had saved for Eliot that they had collected from all these people. The Save the Captain Fund, I think is what they called it.
Hemingway's an asshole.
So the one time that we know of that Pound got drunk was because Hemingway spiked his drinks.
I would have very much liked to be a fly on the fucking wall.
Oh my God.
To see Pound hammered.
Oh, I know, right? So anyway, oh my God, I bet, no, never mind. So anyway, so there's a story of how The Wasteland came to be. So let's talk about The Wasteland. April is the cruelest month. I can't do it without him.
I'm hearing it in my head right now.
I know, right? April
is
is
the
the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory with desire, stirring dull roots with the spring rain. Winter kept us warm, covering earth with forgetful snow, feeding a little life with dried tubers.
All right, so is it dried or dead?
Dried.
What's great about this is that it's a send up of Chaucer, right, from the Canterbury Tales.
But it has function.
But it has function. It's not. This isn't a send up just for the sake of a send up.
Yeah.
Because when you think of spring, you think of growth, and that is not the spring he's imagining.
No. Well, the way I've always understood it, the way I've always interpreted it is, April's the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire. The way I've always pictured it is, okay, how are we going to remember this war if nature's going to cover it up?
I would agree with that.
That's what I've always gotten from that opening is that nature's going to cover all this up and we're going to forget. We can't forget. And thus he goes into these wonderful little summer surprises coming up over the Starnbargee. With a shower of rain, we stopped in the colonnade, went on in sunlight into the Hofgarten, and drank coffee and talked for an hour.
And that's one of the characters he creates for the poem.
My cousins, he took me out on a sled, and I was frightened. He said, Marie, Marie, hold on tight. Hearing him say Marie, Marie, because he goes,
Marie, Marie. So she's the first character we get in the play, and it's from her childhood, which presumably is before the war.
Yeah.
And it's a great time.
It is. It's a good time, and that's what he's talking about. April's going to cover that up. We're going to lose it if we're not careful.
Oh, I think you could make the argument he's also saying it's too late.
Yeah.
It's already lost.
It's already lost.
You can't go back before the war. It's
Yeah.
too late for that. She's trying.
Yeah. And fast forward a little bit, or skip some. This is a quote. You gave me hyacinths first a year ago. They called me the hyacinth girl. Yet when we came back late from the hyacinth garden, your arms full and your hair wet, I could not speak and my eyes failed. I was neither living nor dead, and I knew nothing. Looking into the heart of light, the silence. Ud under leer das Meer.
German.
Yeah. Well, okay. I think there's like 7 languages in
There
this
are.
poem.
Ending with Sanskrit.
Yeah.
Shanti, shanti,
Yeah.
shanti.
Well, it's yeah. We'll get to that because then he's got the. It's not just the shanti. That's the back end of it. The front end of it, he's got throughout the
That's right.
the final stanzas.
That's right. Well played, sir.
Your arms full and your hair wet, I could not speak, and my eyes failed. I was neither living nor dead, and I knew nothing.
Oh. And then the war encroaches.
Yes.
This is the first intimations we get of the war. And you look over it if you're not paying attention.
So this is the first heartbreaking moment of the entire poem, and there are so many heartbreaking moments in this poem. Under the brown fog of a winter dawn, a crowd flowed over London Bridge, so many. I had not thought death had undone so many.
These are ghosts.
Sighs, short and infrequent, were exhaled, and each man fixed his eyes before his feet, flowed up the hill and down King William Street to where St. Mary Woolnoth kept the hours. With a dead sound on the final stroke of 9, there I saw one I knew and stopped him, crying, "Stetson, you who were with me in the ships at Mylay, that corpse you planted last year in your garden, has it begun to sprout?"
And so there are 2 ways to deal with this scene.
Yeah.
And I think they're both equally good.
Mm-hmm.
One, and this is your argument,
Mm-hmm.
the ghosts of all the dead soldiers
Mm-hmm.
walking over London Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Or 2, everyone who's still alive is a shadow of their former selves. And they're crossing the bridge.
Yeah.
And it's another character, so we're no longer with Marie,
Yeah.
although he never tells you that.
Yeah.
He just blends it right in so that now we're memories of before the war,
Yep.
now after the war.
Yeah. And he keeps going backwards and forwards.
And he does. So
What's
there-
interesting is the only moment where he lives in the war itself is at the pub.
Yes. Hurry up, please, it's time.
Yeah. That's the only time he's actually in the war.
Yeah.
The rest of the time he's either before or after. So he's juxtaposing the good times against the bad times. The aftermath, right? And that great catalysm that's in the middle, the only time you get a really good look at it, you're still not looking at the war.
No. You never see the war head on. You only ever see the effects of the war,
Yeah.
which makes sense.
We'll come back to the pub. Because this is, to me, this is the one that really, when it hit me, when I finally understood it. Here's the thing about this poem. We need to explain this. We're only hitting highlights.
Mm-hmm. There are whole books on this poem.
There are courses on this poem.
Yep.
Full-blown 16-week classes on this poem. Every time you read it, you find something new. And every time you read it, you find a new way to interpret this thing. That's one of the beauty. It's the worst thing to happen to poetry. At the same time, it's the best thing to ever happen to poetry because you can't get away from seeing something new every time you read this poem. Finding something new. It's nonstop.
It is.
The first time I realized what this section was about, I cried because it's so sad. It's probably the saddest moment in the entire poem.
That's saying something.
This is at the beginning of the fire sermon. The river's tent is broken. The last fingers of leaf clutch and sink into the wet bank. The wind crosses the brown land unheard. The nymphs are departed. Sweet Thames, run softly till I end my song. turn. The river bears no empty bottles, sandwich papers, silk handkerchiefs, cardboard boxes, cigarette ends, or other testimony of summer nights. The nymphs are departed, and their friends, the loitering heirs of city directors, departed, have left no addresses. By the waters of Leman I sat down and wept. Sweet Thames, run softly till I end my song. Sweet Thames, run softly, for I speak not loud or long. But at my back, in a cold blast I hear the rattle of the bones, and chuckles spread from ear to ear.
It's the war again.
Yeah, they're not coming home.
They're not coming home.
I always, when I teach this part of the poem, I ask the students, who are the nymphs? And they never get it. And he tells you, that all you got to do is focus on this group of lines. The river bears no empty bottles, sandwich paper, silk handkerchiefs, cardboard boxes, cigarette ends, or other testimony of summer nights. Yep. The nymphs are departed.
Well, the nymphs are a symbol of something.
Yeah.
This is innocence, and it's gone.
It's gone. You also go back to what you were saying about the villages.
Yeah.
All the young people gone.
Yep.
Who represents youth? The younger people. And who's going to fight in the war? The youth.
And the nymphs represent younger people.
Yes. There's so much that he's doing with this. He sat down and wept.
The worst part of the poem is there's no hope.
Yeah.
I mean,
well,
maybe at the end.
At the end, that's
Maybe.
questionable. That's the thing about the ending, because he leaves it open.
Yeah. I have a hard time seeing much that's positive except for the end.
Yeah.
And even the end is tainted.
Yeah.
It's tainted. Oh, it's so good.
All right, so let's go back to the pub.
Hurry
God.
up, please.
Yep.
It's time. Last call.
Yep. When Lil's husband got demobbed, I said, I didn't mince my words. I said to her myself, hurry up, please, it's time.
That's the barkeep interrupting.
Yep. Now Albert's coming back. Make yourself a bit smart. He'll want to know what you've done with the money that he gave you to get yourself some teeth. He did. I was there. You have them all out, Lil. Get a nice set. He said, I swear I can't bear to look at you, and no more can't I said, and think of poor Albert. He's been in the army 4 years. He wants a good time. And if you don't give it to him, there's others will, I said. Oh, is there, she said. Something of that, I said. Then I'll know who to thank, she said, and give me a straight look. Hurry up, please, it's time.
Yep.
If you don't like it, you can get on with it, I said. Others can pick and choose if you can't. But if Albert makes off, it won't be for a lack of telling. You ought to be ashamed, I said, to look so antique, and her only 31. I can't help it, she said, pulling a long face. It's them pills I took to bring it off, she said.
Mm-hmm.
She's had 5 already and nearly died of young George. The chemist said it would be all right, but I've never been the same. You are a proper fool, I said. Well, if Albert won't leave you alone, there it is, I said. What you get married for if you don't want children? Hurry up, please, it's time. Well, that Sunday, Albert was home. They had a hot gammon, and they asked me into dinner to get the beauty of it hot. Hurry up, please, it's time. Hurry up, please, it's time. Good night, Bill. Good night, Lou. Good night, May. Good night. Ta-ta. Good night. Good night. Good night, ladies. Good night. Sweet ladies. Good night. Good night.
One of the few moments in the poem that is absolutely fucking hilarious.
Yeah.
Well, if you won't have sex with him, somebody else
Somebody
is gonna.
else will. And then she looks at her and says, well, I'll know who it is.
Yep. And then taking pills to abort a pregnancy.
baby that
Yeah.
doesn't abort because
Yeah.
she's had 5 kids already.
Never worked.
Never worked, and she almost died of the 5th one.
Yep.
And lost her teeth because of it.
At the age of 31.
31.
It's one of the few moments in the poem that is laugh out loud funny.
Yep. But then you have this moment.
Well, okay, before that,
Yeah.
this refrain, hurry up please, it's time.
Yes.
The
Go ahead.
idea that we are running out of time.
Yeah.
So even in the humor, you're constantly reminded this poem is about death.
Yeah. Flushed and decided, he assaults at once. Exploring hands encountered no defiance. His vanity requires no response and makes a welcome of indifference. And I, Tiresias, have forsuffered all, enacted on the same divan or bed. I, who have sat by Thebes below the wall and walked among the lowest of the dead, bestows one final patronizing kiss and gropes his way, finding the stairs unlit. She turns and looks a moment in the glass, hardly aware of her departed lover. Her brain allows one half-formed thought to pass. Well, now that's done, and I'm glad it's over. When lovely woman stoops to folly and paces about her room again, alone, she smooths her hair with automatic hand and puts a record on the gramophone. Love is dead.
Everything is dead.
Everything is dead. So you juxtapose it against what's going on at the pub. You have a woman who's been unfaithful to her husband who's off at war.
Yep.
And she's been trying to hide it. It's actually gotten worse, and she's literally falling apart.
Yep.
And then you have the woman who is lonely because he's off at war. And she's inviting random lovers in to fill a void that she knows she can't fill. Because love is dead.
It's dead.
Everything is dead, as you noted.
You can't even have attachments in this
No.
poem. You can have liaisons,
Mm-hmm.
you can have trysts, you can have one-night stands, but you can't have love.
No.
There's no love in the poem.
No. None.
There's no love in the poem, and we are running out of time.
Yep. All right. You know what? Do this. Okay, I see now. I had it backwards. Okay. Oh, God. Okay. This is from the Thunder Answered. There's not even silence in the mountains, but dry, sterile thunder without rain. There's not even solitude in the mountains, but red, sullen faces sneer and snarl from doors of mud-raked houses. If there were water and no rock, if there were rock and also water, and water, a spring, a pool among the rock, if there were the sound of water only, not the cicada and dry grass singing, but sound of water over a rock, where the hermit thrush sings in the pine trees, drip, drop, drip, drop, 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 drop. But there is no water.
There's no life.
No.
Nothing to feed life, nothing for growth, nothing. Just rocks.
Just rocks. If there were water under the rock, if there were rock and water, but there is no water.
And this is weird because in the beginning he talks about spring.
Yeah.
Where's spring in the rest of the poem?
Right. It's gone. It's all winter. Who is the third who walks always beside you? When I count, there are only you and I together. But when I look ahead up the white road, there's always another one walking beside you. Gliding, wrapped in a brown mantle, hooded, I do not know whether man or woman, but who is that on the other side of you? This is the way I explain it to my students. Of course, he's talking about the road to Emmaus, right? Got it right that time, right?
Yep.
Emmaus?
Emmaus. The resurrected Christ that they don't recognize.
Yes. They're looking ahead, and he knows that he can turn and look and see his friend, but when he looks ahead, there's a third person on the other side. And he only sees him out of the corner of his eye. Of course, he's as I just mentioned, he's telling the story of the disciples on the road to Emmaus when Jesus appears to them and starts talking to them. Notice this one's not talking. He's just walking with him. But when he turns, it's gone.
Which is not the case. So what he's left out of the Emmaus story is they beg him to come with them because it's getting late.
Mm-hmm.
And they sit down, and as soon as he breaks bread and blesses it, they recognize him, and he disappears.
Mm-hmm.
They never recognize him in the wasteland.
No. You know why? Because religion is dead. God is dead.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
God is dead. The whole thing, all the way through this freaking poem, he lays out everything we've lost.
Yep.
Hence why it's called the wasteland.
Now, he later on changes his mind
Mm-hmm.
when he becomes an Anglican.
Oh, yeah.
Or an Anglo-Catholic, I should be more clear.
Here we go. Ganga was sunken, and the limp leaves waited for rain, while the black clouds gathered far distant over Himavant. The jungle crouched, humped in silence. Then spoke the thunder, Da, Data. What have we given? My friend, blood shaking my heart, the awful daring of a moment's surrender which an age of prudence can never retract. By this day and this only we have existed, which is not to be found in our obituaries or in memories draped by the beneficent spider or under seals broken by the lean solicitor in our empty rooms. So in the first piece, and there's three pieces to this, right? So when he says da da da, what have we given? And he answers the question. This is what we've given. We've given everything which an age of prudence can never retract. By this, and this only, we have existed, which is not to be found in our obituaries or in memories draped by the beneficent spider. In other words, the things that they can't take away. This war destroyed everything except one thing, our spirit. It can't take that away. What have we given? We've given everything but our spirit. Dayadam. I have heard the key turn in the door once and turn once only. We think of the key, each in his prison thinking of the key. Each confirms a prison. Only at nightfall, ethereal rumors revive for a moment a broken Coriolanus.
Okay, so this goes back to the idea of love is dead. Any kind of connection with anybody
Is dead.
is dead.
Damayada. This is my favorite part. The boat responded gaily to the hand expert with sail and oar. The sea was calm, your heart would have responded gaily when invited, beating obedient to controlling hands. Life goes on. You're not here anymore, but life goes on. I'm still here. I survived. There's hope.
Not a lot.
Not a lot, but it's there.
It's all the things that didn't survive that affect us, though.
Mm-hmm.
The institutions that died. You're talking about the death of religion, the death of God. I told my students, I'm like, if you're fighting one of these wars, it becomes really hard to believe in God.
Yeah.
Because look at what he did.
Yeah.
Look at what he fucked up.
Mm-hmm.
He allowed this shit. He let it happen on his watch.
Not the last line of the poem, but it's It's the end of the wasteland because everything after this is postscript. I sat upon the shore fishing with the arid plain behind me. Shall I at least set my lands in order? I tell my students, this is the difference between modernism and postmodernism. In postmodernism, the end has already happened.
Yeah, the end of history has been
It's
reached.
over.
Yeah.
It's done. With this one, there's optimism. There's a choice. Shall I at least set my lands in order, or shall I leave it be?
You can choose.
You can choose. And that's why I wanted to argue with you about the optimism, because there is a slight optimism at the end, an uptick.
Well, okay, so it's optimism in the way we see optimism in existentialism, which
Yeah.
he was not an existentialist, but there's a great book, and I'm ashamed that I haven't read it all, by Albert Camus, called The Myth of Sisyphus, and it's all about suicide.
Yeah.
And the point he ultimately makes is life is meaningless,
Mm-hmm.
but you have to go on.
Yeah.
And I think Eliot points toward that,
Mm-hmm.
that none of this has any meaning anymore. But we still have a choice.
Yeah.
We don't have great choices,
No.
and the world now sucks. But we
have
have
choices.
a choice.
Yep.
As far as where this poem goes and the influence it's had, probably the natural heir is Ginsberg,
Yeah. How?
because Howe addresses a generation. And how this generation, it's weird, right? And you know that that Ginsberg knew it. What is it that Gertrude Stein called their generation?
The lost generation.
The lost generation. And Ginsberg is playing on that and looking at the Beat generation as being a lost generation.
Yeah. Of course, Hemingway in The Sun Also Rises defines what that generation looks like.
Yes. Well, and so does Eliot, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Eliot shows us that okay, so what have we lost? Innocence is gone, which is why the nymphs are gone.
Yeah.
We've lost love. And
We've
because
lost religion.
we lost religion, and because we're in our own narrow prison cells with no key, even though we dream of the key,
Mm-hmm.
we've lost the potential of connecting with each other. But at the very least, at least we're all in the same boat together.
Yeah.
We're still connected, even though we can never touch.
Yeah.
A horrible way to think about it.
Yeah. But look at what he'd seen.
Yeah, no, he's not, but he's not wrong either. I mean, that was the post-World War I world. Because how do you bounce back from that? People really were suffering.
Yeah.
And from 2014 to 2018, Europe relived it.
Yeah.
A very conscious reliving of the war, so as not to make that same mistake
Ever again.
And there's not, it's not a celebration. If you look at the way they marked that war, there was no celebration. It's not like the Second World War where you can actually say, there's an enemy, they're doing something truly evil,
Mm-hmm.
it is our job to fight them, and
Yeah.
when we win, we celebrate it, and we're going to look back at this war and be happy that we were a part of it. Europe, looking back at the war in 2018, there was no pomp, there was ceremony,
Yeah.
but there was no celebration.
Right.
It was somber. It was like a funeral. And I think if you were to give a European now a copy of The Wasteland,
Mm-hmm.
it would speak more to them than it does to us, because we have no understanding of that war. We barely lost anybody.
Yeah.
as a result of that war. We can't connect with it. It's a meaningless war.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely meaningless. And he's talking about how futile the entire enterprise was. We gain nothing. No one gains anything in this poem. Every character in this poem is losing something.
Yeah.
Marie only has memories
Yep.
of the time before. That's it. And it's the happiest part of the poem,
Yeah.
the memory of being with her cousin, going down the hill in the sled.
Mm-hmm.
It's a happy memory. But unfortunately, that's all it is a memory.
Yeah.
It's a time before the nymphs departed. And that's maybe the most heartbreaking thing about the poem, is that he sets you up and you think, oh, this is really beautiful. This is really positive. And then he takes the rug out from underneath your feet and says, but no, that was before.
Yeah.
This is now.
This is now.
This is now.
Shall I at least set my lands in order?
At-
Shanti.
Does he use the words at least?
Shanti. Yeah, shall I at least set my lands in order? Shall I at least do that? It's a choice.
It is a choice.
Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Y'all gonna comment on that?
I don't know what to say. Why does it end that way, and what does it mean?
Yeah.
Because I don't actually have the notes in front of me.
Well, let me look.
Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Not that
Oh, I've
his-
got the Hollow Men in here. I
not
didn't
that
realize
his
that.
not that his end notes are all that helpful.
Repeated as here, a formal ending to the Upanishad. Yeah.
Yeah.
The peace which passeth understanding is our equivalent to this word. The peace which passeth understanding. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Which he's invoking St. Paul.
Yeah.
Because that comes directly from Paul.
This is Eliot's notes, by the way.
Yeah. You talk about the other part being optimistic. That's the Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. When you compare it with the notes, maybe the most uplifting part of the poem, because the peace that surpasseth all understanding is God.
Yeah.
So God comes back. Religion may be in trouble.
Was he
God
ever
is there.
gone?
God was never gone.
Right.
And if you looked at Eliot after the Wasteland, because I think you have to date Eliot based on his conversion.
Right.
He's already starting to see it. He's already starting to make sense that there's something to this Christian God that he loves. That's the hope of the poem.
Yeah.
The peace that passeth all understanding. That's the hope of the poem.
So this is the final stanza of the Hollow Men, and we'll end on this. And I know this is about the wasteland, but this ties right in.
It does.
Final stanza of the Hollow Men. Here we go round the prickly pear, the prickly pear, the prickly pear. Here we go round the prickly pear at 5 o'clock in the morning. Between the idea and the reality, between the motion and the act, falls the shadow, for thine is the kingdom. Between the conception and the creation, between the emotion and the response, falls the shadow. Life is very long. Between the desire and the spasm, between the potency and the existence, between the essence and the descent, falls the shadow. For thine is the kingdom. For thine is, life is, for thine is thee. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but a whimper. And I have always associated that, I've always thought of that as being God saying, what have you done? He doesn't blow it up. He just looks at us and says, "What have you done?"
Yep. There's no apocalypse in Eliot.
No.
It happens too slowly over too protracted a time
Yeah.
for there to be. Oh,
Yeah. So there you go, kids. What are we doing next week?
have a good day.
Yeah. Sleep well. What are we doing next week, Jay?
I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Tune in to find out. Maybe we'll do Gatsby.
Oh God.
No. We're going to save that. We're going to pocket that one for like midsummer. That's a better time to do Gatsby.
It is.
In the summer. Although this
How?
is a beautiful day. I don't know. Maybe we'll save Hal for a minute.
Yeah. We need to talk about.
You know what
how.
we haven't done? So we did Shakespeare.
Yes.
We haven't. We talked about Tennessee Williams. I'm going to be doing Count on a Hot Tin Roof next week.
Well, there you go.
We need to talk about Tennessee Williams,
I would agree with that.
not just Count on a Hot Tin Roof.
No.
We need to talk about Glass
All of
Menagerie.
Williams.
We got to talk about Streetcar Named Desire.
Yes.
Next week, Tennessee Williams, one of the greatest American playwrights, underrated, surpassed by Eugene O'Neill, Sam Shepard, Arthur Miller. But I think Tennessee Williams,
He's the gold standard. He's the
He is.
benchmark by which you measure everybody.
I think so too. I agree. We'll talk about.
It had to happen sometime, Brian.
We'll talk.
You know what? You know what?
You're an ass.
Something has got to give.
Oh.
I hadn't said that in weeks. Now it's back.
It's back, baby. I'm the barber. That's Dr. J. Peace. Where is this?
Now it's time for Dr. J.